What if the biggest danger in your life is not what you don't know, but what you think you know? What if the greatest threat isn't ignorance, but living with confidence in your own foolishness? This is where the book of Proverbs steps in. If you've never read the Bible before, Proverbs is one of the best places to start. It doesn't demand that you know Israel's history. It doesn't require that you understand deep theology. It speaks directly like a father to his son, like a teacher to a student, like a friend pulling you back from the edge of a cliff. Proverbs is a book of wisdom, but not wisdom the way the world defines it. It's not clever quotes for social media or empty slogans about chasing your dreams. In the Bible, wisdom means learning how to live in harmony with the way God designed reality. It means seeing life through his eyes, making choices that align with his truth. Foolishness, on the other hand, is living against the grain of creation, breaking yourself on the world because you refuse to listen. The book of Proverbs is traditionally linked to King Solomon, son of David, who was given a choice by God: riches, long life, or wisdom. Solomon asked for wisdom, and God gave him more than any man had ever received. From his reign flowed thousands of sayings, parables, and observations about life. Later generations of Israel collected them, organized them, and preserved them in what we now know as Proverbs. These sayings were not just clever, they were survival guides for the soul. Why were they written? Because every generation faces the same crossroads. Every young person, every adult, every leader has to choose daily between wisdom and folly, righteousness and wickedness, humility and pride. Proverbs was written to show that those choices are not neutral. They shape your destiny. Wisdom leads to life. Foolishness leads to destruction. And this is why Proverbs matters for you today. Its words are not dusty sayings locked in an ancient world. They speak into your decisions about relationships, money, work, integrity, sex, pride, justice, and faith. Proverbs will confront the lies our culture tells you, that you can build your own truth, that you can cheat consequences, that pleasure alone can fill the soul. It will call you to something higher, stronger, and lasting. The fear of the Lord, which is the beginning of wisdom. And here's the promise: if you walk through this book with an open heart, you will not just learn how to avoid mistakes. You will learn how to live. You will discover that wisdom is not optional. It's life or death. This is deep Bible stories where Scripture is explained like never before, cinematic, bold, and alive. If this is your first encounter with the Bible, you're in the right place. Don't just keep this wisdom to yourself, share it so others can discover God's truth. We've already walked through books like Genesis, Matthew, Isaiah, and the Psalms, and you can explore them all ad-free on our website. We've also turned our most powerful teachings into e-books for deeper study, anytime, anywhere. Our mission is simple: not to entertain, but to help you draw closer to God. Everything you need to grow is linked in the description below. So if you've ever asked, is there a better way to live? A way that actually works? The answer is yes. And Proverbs is the roadmap. By the end of this journey, you'll know what wisdom really is, where it comes from, and why it's worth more than silver or gold. Now let's step into the story and meet the king who asked for wisdom and changed the world. We just asked the question, is there a better way to live? Proverbs says yes, and it introduces us to wisdom that can save your life. But where did this wisdom come from? How did these sayings become part of the Bible? To answer that, we need to step into the story of a king whose request changed the course of history: Solomon, son of David. The story is almost cinematic. David, Israel's warrior king, the man who had slain giants and written psalms, was nearing the end of his life. The crown passed to his son Solomon, a young man stepping into responsibility too great for him. He was not the strongest. He was not the most experienced. And as he took the throne, the weight of leading God's people pressed down on him like a mountain. One night, God appeared to Solomon in a dream. Imagine that, heaven breaking into sleep. And God's voice thundered with a question no man had ever heard. Ask for whatever you want me to give you. Power, wealth, long life, victory over enemies. The world was at Solomon's feet. What would you ask for? Solomon's answer was startling. He said, I am only a little child and do not know how to carry out my duties. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. Out of all the things he could have asked for, he chose wisdom, not more years, not more riches, not more power. He asked for the ability to see clearly, to judge rightly, to rule with understanding. And God was pleased, more than pleased. He said, since you have asked for this, and not for long life or wealth or the death of your enemies, I will give you a wise and discerning heart, so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be. And along with wisdom, God gave him riches and honor as well. From that night, Solomon's wisdom became legendary. 2 women once came before him, both claiming to be the mother of the same baby. With no witnesses, no evidence, the case seemed impossible. But Solomon asked for a sword, commanding the child to be divided in 2, half for each woman. One woman remained silent. The other cried out, No, give her the baby, just don't kill him. And Solomon declared, She is the true mother. The story spread across Israel, and the nation marveled. God's wisdom was at work in their king. But Solomon didn't just use wisdom in judgment. He collected it, studied it, wrote it down. Scripture tells us he spoke 3,000 proverbs and composed 1,005 songs. The book of Proverbs gathers many of these sayings, short, sharp truths about life. Some he wrote, others were passed down through Israel's elders and gathered under his reign. Later, kings and scribes preserved and added to them, making the collection we have today. For Israel, these proverbs were more than clever lines. They were training for life. Fathers taught them to sons. Teachers recited them to students. They shaped decisions in the marketplace, in friendships, in leadership. They were practical, earthy, and unforgettable. Sayings like, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Or, go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider its ways and be wise. Or, pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. Short, simple, but each one carried the weight of God's wisdom. And this wisdom mattered because Israel was called to be different. Other nations built power on cruelty, deception, and idols. But Israel's strength was to be its righteousness. Proverbs taught them that wisdom wasn't just about being clever. It was about fearing the Lord, living in reverence, walking in justice. The sayings of Solomon became the moral backbone of a nation chosen to reflect God's character. Yet the story of Solomon is also a warning. For all his wisdom, for all his riches, his heart eventually strayed. He married foreign wives who led him into idolatry. He built temples to false gods. The man who once asked for wisdom fell into folly. And this shows us something crucial. Knowing wisdom is not enough. It must be lived. Proverbs are not decorations for the mind. They are direction for the soul. Even the wisest man can fall if he refuses to follow what he knows is true. This is why Proverbs was written, not just for Solomon's time, but for every generation. It confronts us with choices. Will you listen to wisdom or ignore it? Will you walk the narrow road that leads to life, or the broad road that leads to destruction? Proverbs tells us those choices are daily, constant, and defining. And the heartbeat of all this wisdom can be summed up in one verse, the cornerstone of the book. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. That single truth is where Proverbs takes us next. Because wisdom is not found in human cleverness or worldly success. It begins with reverence for God. And without that, even Solomon's wisdom could not save him. Solomon's story showed us something vital. Wisdom is more than clever words or brilliant strategies. It is not measured by how many proverbs you can recite or how sharp your mind can think. Solomon had all of that, songs, sayings, insight beyond measure. Yet his heart still wandered because he forgot the foundation. That is why the book of Proverbs opens with a declaration that cannot be ignored, a line that cuts to the very core of life itself. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. Read that again slowly. The fear of the Lord is not the end of wisdom. It is the beginning. It is the starting point. It is the doorway. Without it, you may collect information, you may master skills, you may appear intelligent in the eyes of the world, but you will miss the very heart of wisdom. But what does it mean to fear the Lord? It is not the kind of fear that makes you run away, like hiding from a storm or a wild animal. It is reverence, awe, the recognition that God is holy, eternal, unshakable, and we are not. It is bowing your heart before Him, admitting that He is Creator and we are creatures. It is humility, the willingness to let His voice guide you, His truth correct you, His presence shape you. To fear the Lord is to take Him seriously, so seriously that every choice bends toward Him. Think of standing at the edge of the ocean. You love its beauty. You marvel at its power. You respect its depth. You know you cannot control it. That awe is a shadow of what it means to fear God. He is not only powerful, He is personal. He is not only creator, He is judge. He is not only holy, He is merciful. To fear Him is to recognize all of this and to live accordingly. The opposite is the fool. Proverbs is blunt about fools. A fool is not simply uneducated or silly. A fool is someone who hears wisdom and rejects it, someone who despises correction, who mocks truth, who chooses self over God again and again. Fools can be brilliant, wealthy, even admired, but Proverbs says they are heading toward ruin. The way of fools seems right to them, but the wise listen to advice. A fool finds pleasure in wicked schemes, but a person of understanding delights in wisdom. Over and over, Proverbs draws the line. Wisdom begins with God. Folly begins with pride. For Israel, this was not theory. Their history proved it. When they feared the Lord, obeying His voice, they flourished. When they turned to idols, mocking His commands, they fell into destruction. The fear of the Lord was not just personal, it was national. It was the difference between blessing and exile. For us today, the principle is no less urgent. We live in a world drowning in information, but starving for wisdom. Knowledge is everywhere. Online, in books, in classrooms, but wisdom is rare. Why? Because wisdom requires humility before God, and humility is the one thing our culture resists. The world tells you to be your own authority, to define your own truth, to follow your own heart. Proverbs tells you that road ends in disaster. The fear of the Lord is the only path that leads to life. And here is the beauty. When you begin with the fear of the Lord, everything else starts to make sense. Relationships, work, money, speech, decisions, all of them find clarity when anchored in reverence for Him. Without that, they all twist into folly. With it, they become pathways of blessing. This is why the very first lesson in Proverbs is not about work, money, or even friendship. It is about posture. How you position your heart before God, because if you get this wrong, everything else crumbles. But if you get this right, you are building on rock, not sand. And this truth sets the stage for the opening chapters of Proverbs, where wisdom speaks like a parent to a child, pleading, warning, guiding. A father's voice, a mother's instruction, calling their children away from danger and into life. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. That is the foundation. But Proverbs does not stop at foundations. It builds a house you can live in. And the first rooms it builds are not filled with abstract ideas or complicated philosophies. They are filled with the sound of a parent's voice, a father calling to his son, a mother urging her child. Before anything else, Proverbs comes to us like family. Over and over in the first 9 chapters, we hear it. My son, listen to your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. They are a garland to grace your head and a chain to adorn your neck. This is not cold law. It is not a distant command. It is the voice of someone who loves you, warning you of dangers ahead, pleading with you not to walk blindly into destruction. The first warning is about companions. My son, if sinners entice you, do not give in. It sounds simple, but it is life or death. The wrong crowd has destroyed more lives than any weapon. The father describes men who say, "Come with us, let's lie in wait for blood, let's ambush some innocent soul." They promise quick gain, easy money, instant belonging. But the father's voice cuts through. Such is the path of all who go after ill-gotten gain. It takes away the life of those who get it. Then comes the warning about greed. Proverbs shouts against the lie that wealth can save you. Do not wear yourself out to get rich. Have the wisdom to show restraint. Greed blinds, deceives, enslaves. A little with righteousness, Proverbs says, is better than great gain with injustice. And then, with urgency, the father warns about one of the oldest traps, sexual temptation. Chapters 5, 6, and 7 paint the picture vividly. He warns his son about the adulterous woman, her lips dripping honey but her path leading to death. He describes a young man, lacking sense, wandering near her corner, taken in by her smooth words, like an ox led to slaughter. The warning is clear. Sin always promises sweetness, but ends in bitterness. Always. But notice something beautiful here. The warnings are not only about avoiding evil, they are about choosing life. In contrast to the adulteress, Proverbs introduces Lady Wisdom. She stands in the streets, raising her voice, calling out, "How long will you who are simple love your simple ways? Repent at my rebuke, and I will pour out my thoughts to you." Wisdom is not hidden. It is not locked in temples or reserved for the elite. She cries out in public places, offering life to anyone who will listen. This is what makes Proverbs so powerful. It does not just condemn, it invites. It does not just warn, it offers. The father's voice is not the voice of fear, but of love, pleading with his children to walk a better path, a path that leads to blessing, not ruin. For Israel, these opening chapters were not just advice for youth. They were survival instructions for a nation. A people chosen to reflect God's holiness could not afford to be swallowed by violence, greed, and lust. Fathers taught these lessons at home. Mothers repeated them in daily life. It was family discipleship, passing wisdom from generation to generation. For us, the message is no less urgent. Every temptation described here is still alive. Peer pressure, greed, sexual sin. They dress differently in modern clothes, but they are the same voices whispering, "Come with us." And the Father's warning is the same, "Do not go." But Proverbs also lifts our eyes beyond earthly parents. The father and mother here become symbols of God's own voice. The warnings are not only family advice, they are divine wisdom calling us away from death and into life. And the choice remains ours. Will we listen or will we ignore? That choice is dramatized even more vividly in the next part of Proverbs. It is not just about parents versus peers. It is about two women calling out, Lady Wisdom and Lady Folly. One leads to life, the other to death. Both are loud, both are persuasive, and every day you must choose which one to follow. That is where Proverbs takes us next. The father's voice in Proverbs is urgent, warning his children about the traps of greed, violence, and adultery. But soon the voice fades into a larger drama, one that stretches beyond the family table into the very streets of life. Suddenly, wisdom and folly are no longer just ideas. They are women, both shouting, both calling, both demanding to be heard. This is not quiet teaching, it is poetry turned into battle, and you are caught in the middle, forced to choose which voice will guide your steps. First, Lady Wisdom appears. She does not hide in secret chambers. She walks into the busiest streets, stands at the city gates where business and justice take place, and lifts her voice. How long, you who are simple, will you love your simple ways? How long will mockers delight in mockery and fools hate knowledge? Repent at my rebuke, and I will pour out my thoughts to you. Wisdom is bold. She does not whisper. She confronts. She pleads. She warns that ignoring her voice leads to ruin, but listening to her brings life. In Proverbs 8, her beauty unfolds even more. Lady Wisdom says she was with God from the beginning, before the mountains were formed, before the seas were set in place. She was beside him as a master worker, rejoicing always in his presence, delighting in the human race. Do you see it? Wisdom is not just practical advice. Wisdom is woven into the very fabric of creation. To walk in wisdom is to walk in harmony with how God designed the universe. To reject her is to break yourself against reality itself. Her promises are rich. With me are riches and honor, enduring wealth and prosperity. Blessed are those who keep my ways. For whoever finds me finds life and receives favor from the Lord. Lady Wisdom is not stingy. She offers abundance, security, and joy, but she demands humility. You cannot follow her while clinging to pride. You cannot walk in her ways while insisting on your own. To choose wisdom, you must bow before God. And then, in sharp contrast, Lady Folly enters. She is loud, brash, and seductive. She sits at her doorway calling out to those passing by, "Stolen water is sweet. Food eaten in secret is delicious." She makes empty promises. Her voice is alluring. Her invitations feel easy, simple, tempting. But the narrator pulls back the curtain. Little do they know that the dead are there, that her guests are deep in the realm of the dead. Folly's banquet is a trap, a feast that leads to a grave. The drama is clear. Two voices are calling, one to life and one to death. Both speak in public. Both appeal to desire. Both sound persuasive, but only one can be followed. For ancient Israel, this imagery was more than poetry. It was the reality of daily life. Wisdom meant obeying God, walking in justice, honesty, and purity. Folly meant bowing to idols, chasing pleasure, ignoring truth. The nation's survival depended on which voice they followed. History showed what happened when they chose folly. They were scattered, conquered, and broken. The voices were not imaginary, they were real. For us today, the same two voices call out. Lady Wisdom still speaks in Scripture, in godly counsel, in the quiet conviction of the Spirit. Lady Folly still shouts in temptation, in the lies of culture, in the whispers of our own pride. Every decision you make is a choice between these voices. Will you listen to the call of wisdom, humble and steady, or the call of folly, loud and reckless? And this is the genius of Proverbs. It does not let you stay neutral. It paints life as a road with only two directions. You cannot follow both voices. You cannot feast at both tables. Every choice, big or small, reveals which one you are answering. But Proverbs doesn't stop with this dramatic picture. It begins to show us how these choices play out in the ordinary parts of life, not just in the grand decisions, but in the smallest details, in the words you speak, the work you do, the friendships you keep, because wisdom is not only about what happens in the temple or in crisis. It lives in your mouth, your hands, your relationships, and nowhere is that more evident than in what you say. Lady Wisdom and Lady Folly stand in the streets, both calling for your attention. One offers life, the other death. And here is the shocking truth. Often the choice between them is revealed not in your grand decisions, but in the smallest instrument you use every single day, your tongue. Proverbs does not treat speech as casual or harmless. It declares that your words carry the power of life and death. They can heal or destroy, bless or curse, build or break. The tongue has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruit. That verse is not a metaphor, it is reality. Wars have been started by words, families have been shattered by gossip, friendships have been poisoned by lies, but words have also comforted the grieving, restored the broken, and ignited hope in the hopeless. The tongue is small, but its impact is eternal. Proverbs is relentless in exposing the dangers of careless speech. A gossip betrays a confidence, but a trustworthy person keeps a secret. Gossip may feel harmless, a whisper, a story, a joke, but Proverbs says it betrays. It breaks trust. It destroys relationships. The tongue that spreads lies leaves a trail of wounds that cannot be undone. A perverse tongue crushes the spirit. Words can feel like daggers, piercing deeper than any blade. But Proverbs also reveals the opposite, the power of righteous speech. Gracious words are a honeycomb, sweet to the soul and healing to the bones. Imagine that. Your words can taste like honey, bringing sweetness and healing where there was bitterness. The tongue of the wise brings healing. Words can be medicine. They can lift a weary soul, calm a storm of anger, mend a broken heart. And then there is truth. Proverbs draws a sharp line here. The Lord detests lying lips, but he delights in people who are trustworthy. Lies may give you advantage for a moment, but they rot the soul and bring ruin. Truth may cost you in the short term, but it delights the Lord and secures your steps. Wisdom chooses truth, even when it hurts. Folly hides in lies, even when they sound sweet. For ancient Israel, these proverbs about speech shaped daily community life. In villages and markets, in family homes and royal courts, words carried weight. A false witness could condemn the innocent. A harsh answer could spark violence. A gentle response could turn away wrath. Entire communities survived or collapsed based on how people spoke. The Proverbs were a constant reminder, your tongue is never neutral. And for us today, the lesson is even more urgent. We live in an age of constant words, texts, emails, posts, comments. The reach of our tongue has multiplied. What you say in a moment can circle the globe in seconds. A careless word can destroy a reputation forever. A word of encouragement can save a life teetering on the edge. If words held power in Solomon's day, how much more in ours? Here is the sobering reality. Your words reveal your heart. Proverbs says, "The mouth speaks from the abundance of the heart. What flows from your lips shows what lives inside you." Bitter words come from a bitter heart. Kind words flow from a heart shaped by wisdom. The tongue is a mirror, exposing whether you are listening to Lady Wisdom or Lady Folly. But here is the hope: your words can change. A fool stays trapped in lies and anger, but the wise learn to guard their tongue. They pause before speaking. They choose words that build, not break. They let God shape their heart and their mouth follows. This is wisdom in action. And Proverbs does not leave it at words. It moves to another daily arena of life where wisdom and folly clash, the way we work. Just as your tongue can reveal your heart, your hands can reveal your character. Diligence or laziness, integrity or deceit. Work becomes the stage where wisdom proves itself. That is where Proverbs takes us next. Wisdom doesn't just live in your mouth, it shows up in your hands. Proverbs is clear. What you do with your work is a mirror of your soul. You can speak well, pray well, sing well, but if your hands are idle or dishonest, you are walking the path of a fool. Look at the ant. So small you could crush it without thought, yet Solomon stops the world to point at it. Go to the ant, you sluggard, consider its ways and be wise. No boss hovers over it, no king shouts commands, and yet the ant works. It carries what is 10 times its weight. It labors today for tomorrow's need. It doesn't wait for applause. It doesn't make excuses. It simply does what must be done. And God calls you to learn from it. Now look at the sluggard, the fool of labor. He says, "There's a lion in the road," as if danger excuses his laziness. He buries his hand in the dish, but is too tired to lift food to his mouth. He folds his arms, mutters, "Just a little more sleep," and doesn't notice the weeds choking his field, the walls of his vineyard collapsing, the harvest withering before his eyes. Laziness doesn't crash down suddenly. It seeps in like poison, quiet, invisible, until it robs you blind. But Proverbs doesn't just attack laziness, it confronts dishonesty. In ancient markets, merchants tilted their scales to cheat buyers. Proverbs thunders against it. Dishonest scales are an abomination to the Lord, but accurate weights are his delight. Do you see it? God himself watches business deals. He is not only Lord of temples, but Lord of markets. Every transaction is a testimony, either of integrity or of corruption. You can fool people, but you cannot fool the God who weighs hearts. And then comes the trap of greed. Do not wear yourself out to get rich. Do not trust your own cleverness. Money has wings, Proverbs says, and it will fly away when you least expect it. Riches cannot save you. They cannot comfort your soul when death comes. They cannot shield you when judgment falls. If money is your master, you will end in slavery. For Israel, this was life or death wisdom. Their fields, their herds, their daily labor were not just survival, they were worship. A lazy farmer starved his family. A dishonest merchant poisoned his community. But a diligent worker and a righteous leader reflected the character of their God. For you, nothing has changed. Laziness wears new clothes now. It looks like endless scrolling, endless entertainment, endless avoidance. Dishonesty hides in little lies, in shortcuts, in hidden corners of work. But Proverbs exposes it all. Wisdom demands diligence. Wisdom demands integrity. Because how you work is not about your boss, your paycheck, or your reputation. It is about your God. And here is the confrontation. Which voice are you listening to in your work? Lady Wisdom calling you to diligence, honesty, and service? Or Lady Folly whispering excuses, shortcuts, and greed? Your answer is not in your words. It is in your hands. And Proverbs presses the lesson deeper, because your hands are not the only thing shaping your future. The people who walk beside you, your friends, your companions, your community, will either sharpen you or destroy you. Walk with the wise and become wise. For a companion of fools suffers harm. Work reveals your character, but you do not walk the road of life alone. Your hands may build your field, but your companions will shape your future. Proverbs is relentless here. Who you walk with will determine where you end up. You can labor with diligence, you can guard your tongue with care, but if you surround yourself with fools, their ruin will become yours. This is why Proverbs hammers this truth again and again. Walk with the wise and become wise, for a companion of fools suffers harm. Think about that. Wisdom is not just caught in books or sermons, it is caught in people. You become like those you spend time with. Sit with the angry, and anger will burn in you. Walk with the greedy, and their hunger will infect your heart. Laugh with mockers, and soon you too will sneer at truth. But walk with the wise, and their counsel, their example, their correction will sharpen you into strength. Proverbs paints this with fire. As iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. Picture two blades clashing, sparks flying, edges sharpened by friction. True friendship is not flattery, it is sharpening. It is honesty that wounds in order to heal. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but an enemy multiplies kisses. A friend who loves you enough to speak truth, even when it stings, is a treasure. But someone who only flatters you, who feeds your pride, who tells you what you want to hear. Proverbs calls that person an enemy in disguise. But the book does not only talk about friends, it speaks about neighbors, about community, about the way wisdom lives in society. Do not withhold good from those to whom it is due when it is in your power to act. True wisdom does not hoard kindness. It moves. It acts. It meets needs. Proverbs envisions communities bound by trust, generosity, and peace. At the same time, Proverbs warns against those who stir conflict. A perverse person stirs up conflict, and a gossip separates close friends. Words can tear apart communities faster than war. Anger, slander, deceit. They unravel the fabric of trust. But wisdom seeks peace. It is to one's glory to overlook an offense. The fool explodes at every insult. The wise man knows when to stay silent, when to forgive, when to let go. And then there is the neighbor next door. Better a neighbor nearby than a brother far away. Proverbs understood daily life. You may have family who loves you, but in times of trouble, the one who is near, the friend who shows up, the neighbor who helps, that is the one who proves their worth. Wisdom teaches us to be that neighbor, to live so that others are blessed by our presence, not harmed by it. For ancient Israel, this was crucial. They were not a scattered collection of individuals. They were a covenant people. Their survival depended on trust, on unity, on shared strength. A foolish friend, a deceitful neighbor, a violent companion could not only ruin one person's life, they could jeopardize an entire community. For us today, the lesson is no less urgent. We live in an age of digital friends and shallow connections, yet Proverbs calls us to something deeper, to friendships that sharpen, not dull, to communities built on peace, not conflict, to neighbors who act, not just speak. Wisdom asks you, who are you walking with? Who shapes your heart? Who has your ear? Because their path will become your path. And here is the sharp edge. You cannot walk with both wisdom and folly. If you walk with the wise, their discipline will challenge you. Their counsel will stretch you. Their faith will steady you. But if you walk with fools, their chaos will drag you into ruin. This is not neutral, it is destiny. But Proverbs doesn't stop at friendship. It presses further into the spaces of power and responsibility, into money, justice, and leadership. Because wisdom is not only about private life and personal circles. It's about how societies are built, how leaders rule, how business is conducted, how justice is upheld. Wisdom is not small. It shapes nations. And that is where Proverbs takes us next. Friendship and community reveal who you are becoming. Walk with the wise, and wisdom rubs off on you. Walk with fools, and their ruin becomes yours. But Proverbs does not stop at your circle of friends or neighbors. It stretches further into the heartbeat of society itself, into money, justice, and leadership. Because wisdom is not just private, it is public. It shapes the marketplace. It guides rulers. It builds or destroys nations. The first lesson is about money. Proverbs never denies its power. Wealth can provide security, opportunity, even joy. But it also comes with danger. The blessing of the Lord brings wealth without painful toil for it. In other words, wealth that is truly a blessing comes from God, not from schemes or oppression. Better a little with righteousness than much gain with injustice. That line pierces like a blade. The world says more is always better. Proverbs says righteousness is worth more than riches. What matters is not how much you have, but how you got it and what you do with it. Greed is exposed as a lie. Do not wear yourself out to get rich. Do not trust your own cleverness. Greed promises freedom, but delivers slavery. It devours your peace. It blinds you to people. It makes you worship the gift instead of the giver. Proverbs unmasks greed as a god that never satisfies, always demanding more. And then there is generosity. Whoever is kind to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will reward them for what they have done. Do you see how radical that is? Giving to the poor is not charity. It is a loan to God Himself. The Lord identifies with the needy, and generosity becomes an act of worship. A generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. Proverbs insists, wealth is not just for keeping, it is for blessing. From money, Proverbs turns to justice. To do what is right and just is more acceptable to the Lord than sacrifice. Israel's neighbors built temples filled with rituals, sacrifices, and offerings. But Proverbs declares that what God values most is justice, fairness in business, honesty in judgment, compassion for the vulnerable. The Lord detests differing weights, and dishonest scales do not please Him. In the marketplace, crooked scales robbed the poor. God called it an abomination. For Him, justice was not optional, it was central. And then we hear the wisdom for rulers. Proverbs speaks often to kings because leadership was sacred. A king's decisions could bless a nation or plunge it into ruin. By justice, a king gives a country stability, but those who are greedy for bribes tear it down. Leadership, Proverbs says, is not about power. It is about righteousness. A corrupt ruler is worse than no ruler at all, but a righteous ruler reflects the very reign of God. Through love and faithfulness, a king's throne is made secure. Through love, his kingdom is upheld. For Israel, these truths were urgent. They were a covenant nation, chosen to reflect God's character. If their markets were corrupt, if their leaders were unjust, if their people were greedy, they betrayed the very God who called them. Proverbs was not just advice for individuals, it was wisdom for the nation's survival. And for us today, the voice of Proverbs still speaks. In every transaction, every paycheck, every business deal, God watches. In every seat of power, every court, every government, God measures justice. In every act of generosity or greed, God weighs the heart. The same God who delights in honest scales, who calls generosity worship, who warns rulers to govern with righteousness, still reigns. But here is the confrontation. Wisdom will not let you hide behind just business. It demands honesty in the office as much as in the temple. It demands justice in leadership as much as in prayer. It demands generosity in the marketplace as much as in worship. Proverbs declares that the way you handle money, power, and people reveals who you serve, God or yourself. And the book ends by driving that wisdom home in one of the most famous portraits of all, the woman of strength. Proverbs 31 takes all of its lessons, diligence, integrity, generosity, wisdom, and shows them embodied in a life. It is not just about gender, it is about what wisdom looks like when it walks, works, speaks, and blesses.